I was spreading my sleeping bag on the cold concrete of Unit B12 when the metal door rattled open. My grandfather stood there, his eyes unsurprised. He didn't speak. He just handed me an old brass key and a wax-sealed envelope. "If you have any pride left," he whispered, "open this where they look down on you the most." The next morning, I walked into the glass tower of Gray Line Foods, holding both. My name is Nora Vale. I'm 29, and I am a ghost who happens to be employed. By day, I am a mid-level compliance officer at Gray Line Foods, a cog in a machine lubricated by buzzwords like sustainability and transparency. I sit in an open-plan office on the 14th floor, reviewing expense reports and supplier contracts, flagging discrepancies that my boss, Mark, usually tells me to reevaluate with a team-first mindset. By night, I live in Norcrest Storage, Unit B12. It's a 10 by 15 concrete box. The air is dead and smells like dust and the faint, chemical sweetness of someone else's mothballed memories. My rent is $180 a month, paid in cash, to a manager who doesn't check the security footage as long as the payment arrives on the 1st. Living here is an exercise in meticulous self-erasure. I arrive after 8 p.m., when the office is closed. I leave before 6 a.m., when the first contractors arrive. I own nothing that doesn't fit in 2 suitcases and a gym bag. My bed is a high-performance sleeping bag rated for 0 degrees, laid on a yoga mat to insulate me from the floor. My kitchen is a protein bar and a bottle of water. I shower at the 24-hour gym 3 blocks away, my membership for which is, ironically, an auto payment I can't seem to cancel. This isn't a lifestyle choice. It's a prison built by my own family. 6 months ago, my credit score was 780. Today, it's 412. The difference is $84,000 in high-interest debt, spread across 3 platinum cards and 2 personal loans. Debt I didn't rack up, debt taken out in my name, using my social security number, by my older sister, Savannah. Savannah, the golden child, the senior brand manager at Gray Line Foods, the one who borrows your identity to consolidate some small payments, babe, it's just procedural, and then buys a downtown condo staging package and a trip to Ibiza. By the time the first 60-day past due notice hit my actual mailbox, the damage was terminal. I filed a police report, but the officer looked at me with bored eyes. Intra-family fraud? Good luck getting a prosecutor to touch that. You're better off paying it. So I am. Every dollar that doesn't go to the storage unit, the gym, or the minimum payment on my gas card goes to the collectors. They call me 10 times a day. I let it go to voicemail. The financial bleed is compounded by a corporate tourniquet. Gray Line Foods, the company my grandfather built, is withholding $4,200 in business expenses I paid for on my personal card, the one card I still had before Savannah nuked my credit. A compliance audit in our Midwest plant, flights, hotel, car rental. I submitted the report 60 days ago. Our new CEO, Graham Kincaid, implemented a streamlined expense system that flags any reimbursement over $1,000 for executive review. My review has been pending for 7 weeks. When I pinged accounting, the reply was a corporate form letter. When I asked Savannah if she could nudge Graham, he was, after all, our uncle by a brief, disastrous marriage to our aunt, she just laughed. "Nora, you know I can't bother the CEO with accounting. Just be patient. We're all team players here." Her own expenses for brand activation dinners, often costing more than my entire audit trip, are approved in hours. I was contemplating which bill to skip this month, car insurance or the storage unit, when the door of B12 screeched open. It was 9 p.m. on a Tuesday. I was bundled in 3 layers, reading a compliance brief by flashlight. The sudden clang of the metal roll-up door was like a gunshot in the dead quiet of the facility. The industrial floodlight from the hallway carved a rectangle of harsh, invasive light onto my floor, pinning me against the back wall. And in that rectangle stood Frank Vale, my grandfather, the founder of Gray Line Foods, the man who turned a single Braxton Vale butcher shop into a national distributor And then, 10 years ago, walked away from it all, handing the keys to his son-in-law, Graham Kincaid, and retreating to his compound. He's a myth in the company, a ghost in his own right. He wore a heavy wool overcoat, the kind that costs more than my annual salary, and leaned on a simple wooden cane. He didn't look angry, he didn't look disappointed, he didn't look surprised, he just looked. My heart was trying to punch its way out of my ribs. The shame was a physical hot acid in my throat. Nora Vale, the granddaughter of the founder, was camping in his old property. He still owned the land under this entire storage facility. He took a slow step in. His eyes scanned the unit, the sleeping bag, the small stack of protein bar wrappers, the single change of work clothes, a gray blazer and black slacks, hanging meticulously from a magnetic hook on the metal wall. He didn't speak. He didn't ask why. He didn't lecture me. Instead, he took off his overcoat. It was a heavy, dark cashmere. He walked over to me, and I flinched, expecting a blow or a reprimand. He just draped the coat over my shoulders. It was impossibly warm. Smelling faintly of cedar and old money, the weight of it was a comfort and an accusation. Then, he reached into his inner pocket. He pulled out 2 items. The first was a brass key, old, heavy, and ornate, like something from a Victorian novel. The second was a thick, cream-colored envelope, sealed not with glue, but with a disc of dark red wax, stamped with the unmistakable sharp V of the Vale family crest. He pressed them into my hand. My fingers, numb from the concrete, barely registered the cold metal and the stiff paper. His voice was a low rasp, dry as old leaves. "If you have any pride left," he whispered, the words not for the hallway, but just for me. "Open this where they look down on you the most." He looked at me for 1 second longer. His eyes weren't sad. They were hard. They were the eyes of the man who had crushed competitors for 40 years. "Go to the right room," he said, "at the right time." Then he turned, pulled the roll-up door down with a final, echoing crash, and was gone. The only sound was the click of his cane fading down the concrete hall. I sat there in the dark, clutching the key and the envelope, wrapped in his coat. The humiliation was total. He hadn't offered help. He hadn't offered a bed, or money, or even a kind word. He had found me at my lowest, and had simply acknowledged the fact. I didn't know whether to scream or cry. Why the theatrics? Why the key? If he wanted to help, why not just write a check and end this nightmare? But that wasn't Frank Vale. He never gave handouts. He only ever gave tests. The next morning, I walked out of the Norcrest facility at 5:45 a.m. I drove my rattling 2008 Civic to the gym, showered in a stall that smelled of bleach and mildew, and put on my gray blazer. I pulled my hair into a tight, severe bun. I looked in the mirror. The exhaustion was a map of blue veins under my eyes. I drove to Braxton Vale, to the glass and steel monolith that was Greyline Foods' headquarters. I walked through the marble lobby, past the giant, offensively cheerful "We Nourish Families" slogan, and swiped my badge. I took the elevator, but not to the 14th floor. His words echoed, "Where they look down on you the most." That wasn't the storage unit. That wasn't the gym. It was here. It was this building. It was the 30th floor, the executive wing, a place where a mid-level compliance drone, had no business being. I walked past the CEO's suite, past the boardroom, and into the executive bathroom. It was silent, empty, and smelled like expensive, anonymous lemon oil, white marble stalls, soft lighting, cloth towels. I locked myself in the largest stall. My hands were shaking. I looked at the envelope. The V seal was perfect, unbroken. I felt like I was defusing a bomb. I snapped the wax seal with my thumbnail. Inside, there was no letter, no check, just 2 documents, folded crisply. The first was a legal filing. Irrevocable proxy agreement. My compliance brain snapped to attention. Cutting through the fear, I scanned the legal jargon. It named me, Nora Vale, as the sole and exclusive proxy holder for the entire Vale Family Trust, effective immediately and lasting until the end of the fiscal year. I knew of the trust. It was the boogeyman of the corporate charter, a relic from the founding that held a massive, silent block of shares. Everyone assumed Frank still controlled it, or that it was defunct. Attached to the proxy was a single-page asset list. My breath caught. The trust held 19.6% of Greyline Foods' voting stock. It was the single largest block of shares in the company. More than Kincaid, more than the board combined, more than any institutional investor. I was holding, in my trembling hands, nearly 1/5 of the company. The second document was a single sheet of my grandfather's personal stationery, a handwritten note, in his sharp, angry script. It was only 2 sentences. Use at this quarter's strategy meeting. The room, 28B, Contract Archive. I stared at the paper. The executive toilets flushed automatically in the stall next to me, making me jump. He didn't save me. He didn't give me $4,200 for my expenses. He didn't clear my $84,000 debt. He didn't offer me a warm bed or a way out of the concrete box in Norcrest. I understood. He wasn't saving me from the cold. He was telling me to burn the building down. My grandfather didn't give me money. He gave me ammunition and the key to the armory. Greyline Foods is the heart of Braxton Vale, and the town is its circulatory system. The company headquarters isn't just a building. It's a monument to my family's legacy, polished to a sterile, unforgiving sheen. The lobby is a cathedral of white marble and glass, designed to make visitors feel small and employees feel grateful. On the wall behind the reception desk, carved into a slab of brushed steel, is the corporate slogan, "We nourish families." Every time I see it, I taste bile. The irony is so thick it's a wonder the air isn't choked with it. The man who currently presides over this temple of corporate virtue is Graham Kincaid. He was briefly my uncle, a footnote in the Vale family history through a short-lived marriage to my aunt. Now, he's the CEO. His official portrait hangs in the lobby, a masterpiece of public relations. He has the requisite silver hair, a jawline that suggests strength without aggression, and the kind of warm, crinkly-eyed smile that focus groups love. The company newsletter calls him a sustainable innovator, a visionary leader for the next generation. His signature is on every internal memo about cost-cutting and optimizing human capital, which is a bloodless way of saying they're laying off 50 people at the packaging plant. I remember him from family holidays years ago. A man who never smiled with his eyes and who could dissect a person's insecurities in a single, quiet sentence. He nourishes no one but himself. My department, compliance, is located on the 14th floor, a bland sea of gray cubicles. We are the company's conscience, which is to say, we are profoundly annoying to everyone with a budget. We are the priests of a religion nobody wants to practice. My job is to ensure the company follows its own rules, not to mention federal and state law. In Kincaid's streamlined gray line, this makes me about as popular as a tax audit. We aren't seen as a safeguard. We're the Department of the annoying reminder room. The friction is most acute when my work crosses paths with my sister's kingdom. Savannah, as senior brand manager, operates in a world of client engagement experiences and synergistic marketing activations. Her team's expense reports are works of fiction. Last month, I flagged a $5,000 charge for a brand partner appreciation dinner. The receipt was from a Michelin-starred restaurant. The brand partner listed was a social media influencer whose entire online persona was built around being a teetotal vegan. The receipt included 3 bottles of Chateau Margaux and a seafood tower. When I sent the query back to Savannah, she didn't reply to me. Instead, my boss, Mark, appeared at my desk 10 minutes later. His face flushed. "Nora, we need to be team players," he said, avoiding my eyes. "The brand team is under a lot of pressure. Just approve it. Think big picture." But I couldn't stop thinking about the small picture. Specifically, the line items from the community sponsorship department. On paper, it's Greyline's soul. They manage our charitable giving, our local partnerships, our flagship Nourishing Futures school lunch fund, Their budget is generous, a fact Kincaid mentions in every public appearance. The problem is, for the past 6 months, I've noticed a steady stream of invoices being paid out of that school lunch fund to a vendor I'd never heard of, Cielo Azul Key Retreat. The name sounded like a spa. The invoices were vague, citing consulting services and logistical support, with amounts ranging from $15,000 to $50,000. There was no address, just a P.O. box in Florida. I ran a corporate record search. Cielo Azul Key Retreat wasn't a consultancy. It was a 5-star members-only golf and yachting resort in the Florida Keys. Grayline Foods was apparently nourishing the future of schoolchildren by paying for executive golf trips. I compiled a report. I attached the invoices, the corporate search results, and a highlighted section of our own internal ethics policy regarding misappropriation of charitable funds. I sent it to Mark, who told me it was above my pay grade. I escalated it, sending a carefully worded email directly to the Chief Financial Officer's office. The response, which came 2 weeks later from a junior assistant, was a single, chilling sentence. Your commitment is noted, but please focus on your assigned duties and continue to be a team player. It wasn't a suggestion, it was a threat, wrapped in the suffocating softness of corporate jargon. Shut up or get out, and I couldn't afford to get out. Not yet. The pressure isn't just professional, it's personal. A daily grind of small humiliations. Yesterday, the elevator doors slid open on the 14th floor and Savannah was already inside, looking flawless in a silk blouse that cost more than my monthly storage unit fee. She was scrolling through her phone, a small, satisfied smile on her face. As I stepped in, she looked up, her smile tightening into a familiar, condescending smirk. "Hey," she said, her voice loud in the enclosed space. "How's the new place? Having fun at the hostel?" A man from sales, standing beside me, glanced over. His curiosity piqued. I felt my face burn. She knew I was in financial trouble. She had caused it, but she didn't know the specifics. She imagined me in a grimy youth hostel, a scenario that was pathetic enough for her to enjoy. The reality, that I was sleeping in a concrete box, was a truth I guarded like a state secret. "It's fine," I said, my voice flat, staring at the floor numbers as they lit up. "Good," she chirped. "I just think it's so brave, you know? Downsizing, being so minimalist." The doors opened on her floor. The 19th, she glided out, leaving the scent of her expensive perfume and my silent, suffocating rage behind. The entire company is buzzing with a different kind of energy right now. The air is thick with the promise of money. Grayline is on the verge of a massive merger with Norcrest Dynamics, a logistics and refrigeration giant. The official line, plastered on monitors in every elevator and break room, is that this strategic acquisition will allow us to own the cold chain from farm to table. It's Kincaid's magnum opus, the deal that will cement his legacy and send our stock price into the stratosphere. The quarterly strategy meeting, the one my grandfather mentioned in his note, is in 3 days. The sole purpose of that meeting is for the board and key shareholders to give the final, rubber stamp approval for the merger. My proxy vote, my 19.6%, is no longer just a piece of paper. It's a loaded gun pointed at the heart of the biggest deal in the company's history. I needed more than just the Cielo Azul invoices. I needed to understand the landscape. This afternoon, I found an excuse to go to the 17th floor, where the finance and strategy teams were working on the merger. I told Mark I was hand-delivering a sensitive file that couldn't be emailed. He was just happy I wasn't talking about charitable funds. The 17th floor was a hive of frantic, important-looking people. While I waited for the department head's assistant to acknowledge my existence, my eyes scanned the room. On a large magnetic whiteboard, a budget allocation chart was mapped out, detailing the projected costs of the Norcrest integration. It was a sea of predictable terms: legal and advisory fees, severance packages, IT systems integration, rebranding. And then I saw it. A line item, repeated under 3 different project phases: The code was incongruous, an old-fashioned string of characters in a sea of modern financial acronyms. VARX 76. The amounts allocated were staggering, a total of $12 million, classified under the vague heading of Special Project Contingencies. It meant nothing to the junior analysts buzzing around the board, but to me, it was a flare in the dark. Varex, the name rang a distant bell, a memory from my childhood. My grandfather, a photography enthusiast, had an old camera he prized above all others, a Varex, from the 1970s. My heart started to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. It couldn't be a coincidence. My grandfather's note told me to go to room 28B. This budget code was a signpost, pointing in the same direction. I pretended to check an email on my phone. With my thumb, I switched to the camera, angled it up, and snapped a clear, high-resolution photo of the whiteboard. The evidence was now in my pocket. I walked back to the elevator, the proxy vote in my bag feeling heavier, the brass key in my pocket feeling colder. The company presented a perfect, clean facade to the world, but my grandfather had just shown me where the rot was seeping through the marble, and Varex 76 was the first crack in the wall. The 28th floor is a hushed, rarefied space. The air is thinner up here, scented with the leather of expensive briefcases and the quiet hum of money being made. The legal department occupies the East Wing, a fortress of frosted glass and paralegals with tense, focused faces. My grandfather's note said room 28B. I found it tucked away in a short, unmarked corridor just past the chief counsel's office. A single, featureless metal door that looked like it belonged in a factory basement. Not a corporate high-rise. It had no handle, only a keyhole, old and dark with patina. My heart hammered against my ribs. A frantic bird in a cage. This was a place of ghosts and forgotten paper. I glanced down the main corridor, empty. I pulled the heavy brass key from my pocket. My hand was slick with sweat as I slid it into the lock. It resisted for a moment, then turned with a deep, grinding click that seemed to echo in the profound silence. The door swung inward on protesting hinges, opening into a pocket of darkness. I slipped inside, pulling the door shut behind me. The only light came from the crack beneath the door. The air was thick and stagnant, the smell of old paper and decaying glue. I fumbled for a light switch, my fingers finding a cold, bakelite toggle. A single, bare fluorescent bulb flickered on, casting a sterile, buzzing light over the room. It was a small, windowless space, packed floor to ceiling with gray metal filing cabinets, an archive, a tomb of forgotten deals and buried liabilities. As my eyes adjusted, I saw something that didn't belong. In the top corner of the room, mounted on the wall, was a security camera. It was a modern, sleek dome, completely out of place amidst the analog decay. But it wasn't aimed at the door. It was pointed at the back wall, and half of its lens was inexplicably covered by a piece of black electrical tape, as if someone had installed it and then immediately tried to blind it. A warning? A message? I pushed the thought aside and focused on my task. Varex 76. I started with the filing cabinets, my fingers tracing the faded labels. Acquisitions. Supplier contracts, Midwest Division. Litigation, patent dispute, 1988. It was the company's entire history, filed away and forgotten. I moved methodically, my footsteps muffled by the layer of dust on the concrete floor. In the back of the room, behind a stack of banker's boxes, was a different kind of cabinet. It was a squat, heavy-duty steel safe, the kind meant to survive a fire. It had a combination lock, but the dial was frozen with rust. Next to it, however, was a keyhole, identical to the one on the door. I took a breath and slid the brass key in. A second click, louder and more final than the first, echoed in the room. I pulled the heavy door open. Inside, there was only one thing, a gray metal box, like a soldier's footlocker. Stenciled on the lid in faded white paint were the words, Varex 76. I lifted the box out and placed it on the floor. The latches were stiff. I pried them open, the metal groaning in protest. The lid lifted to reveal a bed of yellowed, decaying foam. Nestled within were three objects. First, the camera. It was a Varex SLR from the mid-1970s. A heavy, beautiful piece of machinery, all black metal and textured leatherette. It felt solid, real. A stark contrast to the ephemeral digital world I lived in. Second, a small, lead-sealed film canister. It was heavy for its size. Third, a thin black leather-bound ledger. It was unmarked. I picked up the ledger first. The leather was supple, the pages edged in gold. I opened it. The paper was thick, cream-colored, and filled with my grandfather's precise, angular handwriting. It wasn't a journal. It was an audit, a secret, parallel set of books. The first few pages were filled with intricate diagrams, flowcharts that traced money from Greyline Foods through a web of shell corporations and holding companies I'd never heard of. There were notes in the margins, detailing blanket contracts and discretionary fund allocations. It was a map of the company's secret plumbing, the hidden pipes through which money could be moved silently, invisibly. And then I found the section I was looking for. Halfway through the book, a new heading, Project Halo. My blood ran cold. The handwriting was tight, angry. He described Halo as a contingency fund, but the details made its true purpose clear. It was a slush fund, disguised as a corporate social responsibility initiative. The money was siphoned from legitimate charitable budgets, like the Nourishing Futures school lunch program, and funneled into an unaudited account. Its purpose, stated in my grandfather's cold, clear script, was to manage executive and partner incentives outside of official compensation structures. It was a scheme to pay for bribes, to finance lavish trips for board members and their families, to reward friendly partners who helped grease the wheels of commerce. It was the Cielo Azul Key Retreat invoices, explained in brutal detail. It was institutional, calculated corruption, and Kincaid was at the center of it. Taped to the bottom of the last page of the Halo section was a small, yellowed post-it note. My grandfather's handwriting again. A final, chilling directive. If Halo is activated for a capital event, use the trust vote according to Bylaw 12.3. A capital event, the Norcrest merger. He had anticipated this. He had known, years ago, that Kincaid would use this corrupt machinery for his biggest prize, and he had planted this time bomb, waiting for someone to find it. Bylaw 12.3. I made a mental note to look it up the second I left this room. My hands were shaking as I put the ledger down and picked up the film canister. I broke the lead seal with the edge of the brass key. Inside was not an undeveloped roll of film. It was a spool of developed 35mm negatives. My grandfather had left me the evidence, not the means to capture it. I held a strip of negatives up to the buzzing fluorescent light. The images were grainy, stark black and whites. The first few were innocuous shots of building exteriors, street corners. Then, a series of pictures taken from a distance, through a window. A man was sitting at a table in a dimly lit restaurant, Graham Kincaid. He wasn't smiling his focus group-approved smile. His face was hard, predatory. Across from him sat another man, his face obscured in shadow. On the table between them was a thick manila envelope. Kincaid was sliding it across the table. The next shot showed the other man opening it. It was full of cash. I scrolled to the last few negatives on the strip. The angle was closer now. A different meeting. This one in what looked like a hotel lobby. Kincaid was shaking hands with a man whose face I could now see clearly. And under the image, my grandfather had used a fine-tipped pen to write directly on the negative's border. G. Kincaid and M. Varela. Varela Outcomes, LLC. Varela Outcomes. A name I didn't recognize, but one that I knew was about to become very important. I pulled the last photo from the canister. It was an actual print, not a negative, a single, glossy photograph. It was a close-up of a document, a handwritten receipt for consulting services, signed by both Kincaid and Varela. I flipped the photo over. On the back, in the same precise script as the ledger, was a date from 3 years ago, a location, a hotel in Miami, and a witness signature. The signature belonged to Elias Vance, my grandfather's personal lawyer for 40 years. He had notarized the evidence. This was the core of it, the origin of the rot. Varex 76 wasn't just a camera. It was a black box, a flight recorder for the company's moral crash. I couldn't walk out with these items. They were too precious, too physical. I needed copies. My eyes scanned the room and landed on an old beige machine in the corner, covered in a film of dust, a high-resolution flatbed scanner, a relic from the days before everything was cloud-based. I spent the next hour in a state of cold, focused fury. I wiped the scanner down and plugged it in. The machine whirred to life, one by one. I scanned every single page of my grandfather's ledger. I scanned the photograph, front and back. I even scanned the most damning strips of negatives. The resolution was incredible, capturing every detail, every handwritten note, every pixel of grain. As the files compiled on the scanner's ancient desktop interface, I used my phone to create a new, encrypted email address with a provider I'd never used. I logged into the scanner's email client and sent the entire trove of evidence to myself. I watched the progress bar crawl, then flash, message sent. For backup, I pulled a tiny object from the inside of my blazer, a micro USB drive, disguised as a shank button. I had sewn it on myself weeks ago, a paranoid precaution I never thought I'd actually use. I plugged it into the scanner's USB port and copied everything again. I ejected the drive, palmed it, and with a practiced motion, slipped it back into the fabric casing of the button on my cuff. A secret, safe within a secret. I placed the ledger, the photos, and the negatives back into the Varex 76 box. I arranged the foam exactly as I had found it. I closed the lid, fastened the latches, and placed the box back in the fireproof safe. I swung the heavy door shut and turned the brass key. Then I went to the main door of room 28B, stepped out into the corridor, and pulled it shut. The lock engaged with a final, definitive thud. Walking back to the elevator, I felt strangely calm. The fear and confusion were gone, burned away by a cold, clear purpose. The sound of paper in that room wasn't the whisper of ghosts. It was the rustle of living evidence, and it had just told me exactly what I needed to do. I spent that night in Unit B12, but I didn't sleep. The cold concrete floor was my desk. I spread the contents of the wax-sealed envelope on my sleeping bag under the harsh, battery-powered light of my camping lantern. The first document was the proxy. The legal language was dense, but its meaning was absolute. Irrevocable Proxy Agreement. The Vale Family Trust hereby appoints Nora Vale as its true and lawful proxy holder, with full power to vote, consent, and otherwise act, as of the date of execution. It was dated 2 days ago, signed by Frank Vale. I was, for all legal purposes, the voice of 19.6% of Greyline Foods. The second document was the handwritten note from my grandfather. This one vote is 19.6% of the voting power. Know when to say little. It wasn't advice. It was a command. This wasn't a negotiation. It was a tactical strike. The third was the official agenda for the quarterly strategy meeting, scheduled for this Friday. My eyes skipped past the preamble, past the CFO's report on Q3 earnings, past the marketing update. I landed on the only item that mattered. Agenda Item 4. Motion to approve the agreement and plan of merger with Norcrest Dynamics, Inc. The entire meeting was a formality to bless Kincaid's $12 million slush fund and his legacy-defining merger. They expected a unanimous vote. They were not expecting me. But the proxy vote alone wasn't the weapon. It was just the trigger. The weapon was the information from room 28B, and the mechanism to deploy it was buried in his final clue. Bylaw 12.3. I pulled out my work laptop, my hands steady. I didn't need the office network. As a compliance officer, I had a local, offline copy of the entire Greyline Foods corporate charter and bylaws on my hard drive. It was our Bible. I opened the 400-page document. I scrolled down, my eyes scanning the dense legal text. Article 1. Stockholders. Article 2. Board of Directors. It was dry, endless. And then, I found it. Article 12. Miscellaneous. Section 12.3. Shareholder right of inspection and audit. I read the clause once, then a second time. It was an obscure, dusty rule, probably written into the original charter by my grandfather and forgotten by Kincaid's modern legal team. It stated that any shareholder holding a stake of 5% or more had the right to call for an independent auditor to be present at any stockholder meeting, provided that said shareholder filed a formal notice of a potential Level 1 compliance risk no less than 24 hours prior to the meeting. A Level 1 risk was defined in the appendix. Any potential financial malfeasance, misallocation of funds, or breach of fiduciary duty that could materially impact a pending corporate action. Project Halo, the Varex 76 Budget Code, the Cielo Azul Key Retreat. My grandfather hadn't just left me ammunition, he had left me the entire legal framework to use it. I couldn't just stand up in the meeting and start shouting about secret ledgers and 35mm film. They would dismiss me as a lunatic, a disgruntled employee, and have security escort me out before I could even say the word proxy. Kincaid would laugh. No, my grandfather was right. Don't shout in a room full of microphones. Let the law speak for you. I had to use the system against itself. I had to be procedural. I had to be cold. I opened my email client. I pulled up a standard corporate template. C12. Internal Notice of Compliance Review. It was a form I used every day to flag minor expense report violations. This time, I was flagging a capital crime. 2. Corporate. Secretary at Grayline Foods. Com. Board. Of. Directors at Grayline Foods. Com. CC. Mark. Davison at Grayline Foods. Com. Legal. Compliance at Grayline Foods. Com. Subject, Formal Notice, C12 Filing, Level 1 Compliance Risk, Bylaw 12.3. I typed with cold precision. My tone was not accusatory. It was helpful. It was the detached, sterile prose of a mid-level compliance drone doing her due diligence. Dear Corporate Secretary and members of the Board, pursuant to Grayline Foods. Corporate Bylaw 12.3, this memorandum serves as formal notification of a potential Level 1 compliance risk. During a routine review of archived project files, Refs Varex 76, and related charitable fund disbursements, Refs Project Halo, materials were identified that suggest a significant, unaudited misallocation of corporate funds. These allocations appear to be linked to vendor accounts, Refo Varela Outcomes LLC, Cielo Azul Key Retreat, that may constitute a breach of fiduciary duty under our corporate charter. As this potential risk materially impacts the financial disclosures provided in the Norcrest Dynamics merger agreement, I am formally invoking the right, as proxy holder for the Vail Family Trust, 19.6%, to have an independent auditor present during the discussion and vote on Agenda Item 4 at the upcoming quarterly strategy meeting. I have already forwarded the relevant auditor engagement request to PricewaterhouseCoopers, our registered independent auditor, to have a senior forensic partner available. Thank you for your attention to this procedural matter. Sincerely, Nora Vail Compliance Officer, Grayline Foods, Proxy Holder, Vail Family Trust. I attached a single document, a PDF of my signed, notarized, irrevocable proxy agreement. I let the document speak for itself. I didn't attach the photos. I didn't attach the ledger. I didn't show my hand. I just showed them the gun. I hit send. The whoosh sound in the dead silent storage unit was deafening. For an hour, there was nothing. I sat on my sleeping bag, my body rigid, my coffee going cold. I was a fisherman who had just dropped a depth charge into the water. Then, my laptop chimed. The reply was from the corporate secretary, a woman named Eliza Hayes, who was Kincaid's chief gatekeeper. Dear Nora, Thank you for your diligence. We appreciate your commitment. However, the agenda for Friday's meeting is set and cannot be altered. Any internal review matters, such as the ones you've noted, will be tabled and assigned to the Internal Audit Committee for review in the next fiscal quarter, after the successful completion of the Norcrest transaction. Your attendance is not required. Sincerely, Eliza. It was a pat on the head, a dismissal. Thank you for your diligence. It was the corporate equivalent of "run along, little girl." They were trying to bury it. They thought I was stupid. They thought an email was enough to stop me. I closed my laptop. They had ignored the digital notice. They would not be able to ignore the physical one. I drove to a 24-hour print shop. I paid in cash to print a hard copy of my C-12 memo, my proxy agreement, and a cover letter I drafted on the spot, formally serving notice to the board. I put it all in a large, stiff legal envelope. At 7 a.m., I was standing outside a local courier service. I paid $75, money I desperately needed for food and gas, for an expedited legal delivery. "This needs to go to this address," I said, handing them the envelope. It wasn't addressed to the Gray Line Tower. It was addressed to the downtown offices of Cleary and Ash, the law firm that served as Gray Line's official legal registered agent. And this is the important part. I need a physical, time-stamped signature of receipt from their mailroom or a registered agent, not a drop-off, a signature, and I need a copy of that signature emailed to me the second it happens. The clerk nodded. Bored. It was just another package. At 8:45 a.m., my phone buzzed. It was an email from the courier service. Attached was a PDF, a scan of my delivery slip, with a clear, looping signature and a timestamp. 8:41 a.m. The trap was set. By ignoring my email, the corporate secretary had created a legal vulnerability. By serving them a physical copy at their registered legal address, I had created an undeniable paper trail. They were now officially served. If they proceeded with the meeting and the vote on Item 4 without acknowledging my Bylaw 12.3 request, the entire vote, the entire merger, would be legally invalid. I had them, and they didn't even know it. I went to the gym, showered, and put on my gray blazer. I felt nothing, just a cold, humming energy. I drove to the Gray Line Tower, swiped my badge, and sat at my cubicle on the 14th floor. I opened a spreadsheet and started reviewing supplier contracts, as if it were just another Tuesday. At 11:03 a.m., my Slack icon flashed. It was a direct message, not from my boss, not from legal. It was from Janine, the Senior Director of Human Resources. Janine, HR. Hey Nora, just wanted to check in. See how you're doing. I heard some confusing rumbles about a memo you sent to the board. Seems like a high-level strategy issue that might be a bit outside a compliance officer's lane. Just wanted to make sure you're not getting ahead of your skis. This Norcrest deal is a huge win for the whole Gray Line family, and we're all very excited about it. Wouldn't want you to do anything that might be, well, career-limiting. Let's find time to chat about your future here. Maybe later today? The nausea hit me in a cold wave, the friendly, helpful tone, the emoji, the word family, the casual, brutal threat. Don't destroy your career. They were panicked. My physical letter had landed. The lawyers at Cleary and Ash had undoubtedly called Kincaid, furious and demanding to know who Nora Vale was. The system was now routing the threat through HR, the corporate muscle. They were trying to scare me, to coerce me into backing down before the meeting. I looked at the blinking cursor in the Slack window. I thought about the $84,000 of debt. I thought about the $4,200 in expenses they were withholding. I thought about my sister's smirk in the elevator. I thought about my grandfather, standing in the cold, draping his coat over my shoulders. Don't shout in a room full of microphones. Let the law speak for you. I typed one word back to Janine. Then I quit Slack. I turned off my email notifications. I put my personal phone on silent and locked it in my desk drawer. They wanted to talk. They wanted to handle this in a back room, to intimidate me, to cut a deal. But I had already spoken. The law was speaking for me now. All I had to do was stay silent. stay alive, and walk into that meeting on Friday. The invitation was waiting on my desk when I returned from serving the legal notice. It wasn't an email. It was a thick, cream-colored card, embossed with the Gray Line logo and a stylized cornucopia. The brand team invites you to the annual Harvest Gala. At the bottom, a handwritten note from my sister. Nora, attendance is expected. We're all celebrating the merger. Don't be difficult. So, on Thursday night, 20 hours before the most important meeting of my life, I found myself at the Stonebrook Grill. It was the kind of restaurant that used foraged in its menu descriptions and had valet parking for cars that cost more than my fraudulent debt. The air was loud with forced laughter and the steady clink of champagne flutes. Every 5 seconds, a smartphone flash illuminated a rictus grin for an Instagram story. I was a ghost at the feast, nursing a club soda, my back to a load-bearing pillar. My presence was an act of compliance. My final one. I wore the same gray blazer I'd showered in at the gym, a silent no in a room full of cocktail dresses and bespoke suits. I knew this wasn't a party, it was a holding pen. Kincaid and HR had tried to spook me. Now they were bringing me into the fold, to smother me with family and team spirit before the meeting, to make my legal challenge seem like a personal, petty betrayal. Savannah, glowing in a backless gold dress, stepped up to the small microphone the restaurant provided for such events. She tapped it, and the clinking subsided. "Hi, everyone. Thank you all for coming." Her voice was bright, practiced. "It's been such an incredible quarter, and I just want to thank my amazing team for all their hard work on the Norcrest activation." Applause spattered the room. She held up her glass, her eyes scanning the crowd until they found me, cowering by the pillar. A shark smile spread across her face. "And I also want to give a special welcome to my little sister, Nora." The room turned. Every eye was on me. My face was hot, my blood cold. "I know she's been working so hard down in compliance," Savannah continued, her voice dripping with faux sincerity. "And I'm just so proud to announce that she's about to get a huge promotion. Because at Gray Line, we take care of family." A wave of sycophantic laughter rippled through the managers and brand specialists. They laughed at the joke. The idea of me, the gray nun of the 14th floor, getting promoted. They laughed at the open, shameless nepotism. They didn't know the real joke. They didn't know the promotion was a lie. And the family was the reason I was living in a metal box. I just stared back at her, my face a mask of polite neutrality. I took a sip of my club soda. This was their move, to frame me as an ungrateful brat who would file a legal complaint even after her generous sister announced a fake promotion. I needed air. I slid through the crowd and pushed open the glass doors to the outdoor terrace. The night air was cold, a welcome shock. The terrace was empty, overlooking the street. Across the way was a row of historic brownstones, their front steps dark. On one, a small blue light glowed on a video doorbell. It was aimed perfectly, covering the entire terrace where I stood. I pulled out my phone. I opened my audio recording app, the one I'd installed specifically for this encounter, and placed the phone face down on the stone railing, as if I'd just set it down. In this state, in a public-facing area, the recording was perfectly legal. I stood there, breathing, waiting. The trap was set. I didn't wait long. The glass door slid open behind me. It was Graham Kincaid. He was alone. He walked over, not like a boss, but like a father. He leaned on the railing next to me, looking out at the city lights. He smelled of expensive scotch and authority. "Nora," he said, his voice a low, reasonable rumble. "This is all just a misunderstanding." I stayed silent. I looked at the blue light of the doorbell camera across the street. "I saw your memo," he said, shaking his head with a sigh. "I appreciate the diligence, really, but you've stumbled into something complex, above your pay grade." "Bylaw 12.3 seems very clear," I said, my voice flat. He chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "You're Frank's granddaughter. All right, all sharp edges, But this isn't his company anymore. You're part of a team, a family. Is that what Janine in HR told you to say? That got a reaction. His smile tightened. The mask slipped. You're in trouble. Nora, I know that. And I know why. He leaned in closer. The smell of scotch was overpowering. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper, meant for me and me alone. He didn't know about the phone on the railing. He didn't know about the camera across the street. I know about Savannah, he whispered. The credit cards, the debt, it's a nasty business. 80, 90,000? Something like that. My heart stopped. He knew the details. Of course he did. He was the CEO. He had HR pull my file. Probably ran a credit check. He had all the leverage. You're a team player, he said, his voice now a blade wrapped in velvet. You sign off on the merger. You walk into that meeting tomorrow. You say you've reviewed the file, and you vote yes with the rest of the board. You do that, and your sisters, special expenses, they disappear. He paused, letting the offer hang in the cold air. I have a discretionary fund for situations just like this, he added. I'll authorize a loyalty bonus to your sister's payroll, enough to cover every dime she owes in your name. It'll be a clean transfer. By Monday, you'll be free. Your debt, your $4,200 in expenses, all of it, gone. All you have to do is be part of the family. It was the perfect bribe. He was offering me my life back, my credit, my apartment, my future. He was offering to fix the problem he had allowed to fester. All I had to do was let him steal millions, let him complete his corrupt merger, and become as dirty as he was. I looked at him. I let a small, transactional smile touch my lips. That's a fantastic offer, Graham, I said, my voice as clear and calm as the night air. He smiled back, relieved. He'd won. He'd bought the little compliance girl. So, I said, just to be clear for my records, you'll use a corporate discretionary fund to pay off my personal, fraudulent debt in exchange for my proxy vote on the Norcrest merger. Is that correct? His smile vanished. He froze. I had just repeated the terms of his bribe, verbatim, into the microphone of my phone. You're a smart girl. Nora, he started, his voice hardening, turning ugly. I am, I said. So to make sure we're both protected, please send all of that in an email. With your digital signature, I'll need the exact amount, the source fund code, and the terms of the vote agreement in writing. You understand? Compliance. He stared at me. The genial uncle was gone. The man in the 35mm photograph, the one sliding cash across a table, was here. His face was white with rage. He was silent, the gears turning in his head, realizing he was on tape, realizing I wasn't scared. At that exact perfect moment of frozen tension, the glass door slid open again. A man stumbled out, laughing, holding a phone. It was Marcus Thorne, the chief counsel for Norcrest Dynamics. He was flushed with champagne. Graham, there you are, he boomed. I was just showing the team. You remember that trip to the Keys? The one that sealed the deal? Kincaid shot him a look of pure venom, but Thorne was too drunk to notice. He shoved his phone toward Kincaid. Look, he said, pointing at the screen. Best group shot I've ever taken. I didn't look at Kincaid. I looked at the large glass window of the restaurant, directly behind Thorne, reflected in the dark glass. I could see his phone screen clearly. It was a group photo of Kincaid, Thorne, and several other men, all on a yacht, holding cigars. And at the top of the screen, clearly visible in the reflection, was the file name. Halo Retreat, PDF. My body moved without my permission. I raised my own phone from the railing, as if to turn off the recording, but I wasn't aiming at the power button. I angled it toward the window. Click. I captured a perfect high-resolution photograph of the reflection, my phone's flash bouncing off the glass. Thorne winced. Hey, no pictures. Sorry, I said, pocketing my phone. Just checking my messages. Kincaid hadn't moved. He was looking at me, but his eyes were dead. He knew what I had just captured. He knew, in that instant, that I had connected his merger partner, Norcrest, directly to the Halo slush fund from my grandfather's ledger. I had the bribe on audio, I had Kincaid on video, and now I had the digital link between Halo and Norcrest. I picked up my glass of club soda. Thank you for the chat, Graham, and for the promotion, Savannah. I raised my glass to them both. I'll see you at the meeting. I didn't wait for a reply. I walked past them, through the suddenly quiet party, and out the front door. I left my club soda on the bar. I didn't run. I walked, my footsteps even on the pavement. I clutched the single thing in my pocket that felt real, the old, heavy, brass key. It was a talisman. It was my armor. As I turned the corner, heading for the bus stop, I couldn't afford the gas to drive my car here. My phone vibrated. It wasn't a call from Kincaid. It wasn't a text from Savannah. It was an encrypted, unknown number, a single, short message. They're all dirty. Check Savannah's secondary account. The one she opened at Braxton First Credit Union 2 years ago. Account ends in 8812. I stopped under a streetlight. My blood turned to ice. Someone else was watching. Someone who knew about Savannah's other accounts. This wasn't just about my personal debt. The message confirmed my worst fear. Savannah wasn't just a reckless spender who had ruined my life. She was a participant. At 8:59 a.m. on Friday, I stood outside the Horizon boardroom. It was a glass box on the 30th floor, designed to convey total transparency while housing the darkest secrets. Inside, the long mahogany table was set with leather blotters, iced water, and tiny, impotent American flags. The air was climate-controlled to a precise, soul-crushing 68 degrees. I was not on the attendee list. My nameplate was not on the table. I held a single, thick leather portfolio under my arm. My blazer was buttoned. My face was a blank slate. The attendees filed in. First, CFO Ron Mercer, a man whose face seemed permanently pinched from years of massaging numbers. Then the 3 independent board members, a retired tech CEO, a former senator, and a venture capitalist, all looking bored, ready to collect their fees and get to lunch. Then the lawyers from Cleary and Ash, their faces grim and their briefcases full of billable hours. Finally, Graham Kincaid. He saw me standing by the door. He didn't smile. He gave a tiny, almost imperceptible shake of his head. A final warning. Go away. I didn't move. The corporate secretary, Eliza Hayes, approached me, her face a mask of polite hostility. Nora, this is a closed meeting. I have a proxy, I said, my voice even, and a procedural matter to address regarding Agenda Item 4. She looked at Kincaid. He gave a curt nod. There was nothing they could do. The signed courier receipt from their own lawyers had them in a box. Denying me entry would be a legal breach they couldn't risk. Eliza stepped aside, her lips a thin, white line. I walked in. I didn't take a seat at the main table. I took a chair against the wall, one of the seats reserved for junior aides and note-takers. The seat of the powerless. It was exactly where I needed to be, in the back row. Looking small and out of place was my sister. Savannah was here as a key stakeholder from Brand, a ceremonial role. She gave me a confused, irritated look. The meeting began. Kincaid called it to order with the brisk, false energy of a man on a tight schedule. Good morning, everyone. Let's get started. Eliza, the minutes from the last meeting? They droned on. Agenda Item 1. Approval of minutes. Passed. Agenda Item 2. CFO's quarterly report. Mercer presented a series of cheerful, meaningless slides. Agenda Item 3. Marketing update. Passed. The rhythm was hypnotic, designed to lull everyone into a state of passive agreement. Which brings us, Kincaid said, a predatory smile finally gracing his lips, to Agenda Item 4, the motion to approve the merger with Norcrest Dynamics. He looked around the table. I trust everyone has reviewed the materials. I believe this is a transformative moment for Grayline, and I'm proud to recommend a yes vote. Any discussion before we call the question? This was my moment. I stood up. The scraping of my chair was the only sound in the room. All eyes turned to me. "Mr. Chairman," I said, my voice clear and carrying across the room. "Pursuant to my C-12 notice, filed and served yesterday morning, and in accordance with Bylaw 12.3, I must interrupt the proceedings." Kincaid's face hardened. "Ms. Vale, this is not the forum for internal compliance queries." "On the contrary, sir," I said, walking to the table. "This is the only forum. Bylaw 12.3 is explicit. A Level 1 compliance risk that materially impacts a pending corporate action must be addressed before that action can be voted upon." I opened my portfolio and laid a single bound document on the polished mahogany in front of him. My Notice of Risk, Level 1. The former senator, a man named Davies, leaned forward, peering at the document. "What is this, Graham?" I answered for him. "It's a summary of findings. Senator, it details the misallocation of several $1 million from the Nourishing Futures Charitable Fund into an unaudited slush fund, codenamed Project Halo." A nervous cough came from one of the lawyers. "The notice includes," I continued, my voice a steady metronome, "3 preliminary exhibits." I tapped the document. "Exhibit A, a scanned copy of a handwritten ledger entry from the founder, detailing the creation and purpose of Project Halo. Exhibit B, a chart cross-referencing invoices from a vendor called Cielo Azul Key Retreat against the budget code VAREX 76, which was used to finance the merger. And Exhibit C," I paused, "a 35mm photograph, taken from a VAREX 76 camera, documenting a cash payment between the CEO and a shell corporation named Varela Outcomes LLC." Kincaid let out a short, sharp laugh. It was a terrible sound. "A handwritten ledger? A 35mm photograph? Ms. Vale, is this a joke? Who in the 21st century believes evidence from a film camera? For all we know, you faked it in your basement." The venture capitalist chuckled. The tension in the room eased slightly. Kincaid had found a thread to pull. Ridicule. "You're right," I said. "You shouldn't trust a copy." I reached back into my portfolio. I pulled out the VAREX camera. It was heavy and black and real. I placed it on the table with a solid, definitive thud. "Which is why I brought the original camera," I said, "and the original negatives." The laughter died. "And," I added, turning to the glass door of the boardroom, "in accordance with Bylaw 12.3, which allows for the presence of an independent auditor to verify such claims, I'd like to invite Mr. Peterson to join us." I nodded to the door. Eliza Hayes, looking horrified, had no choice but to open it. A man in a crisp, gray suit walked in. He was about 60, with the calm, implacable eyes of a man who had seen every possible kind of corporate fraud. "Arthur Peterson," he said to the room, his voice calm. "Senior forensic partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers. I was engaged by the proxy holder for the Vale Family Trust yesterday to be on standby." The board members stared, stunned. The lawyers from Cleary and Ash were now whispering frantically to each other. This had spiraled out of their control. It was then that the main door to the boardroom opened again, a slow, deliberate sound. My grandfather, Frank Vale, walked in, leaning on his simple wooden cane. He wore his heavy wool overcoat. Despite the controlled temperature of the room, he didn't look at Kincaid. He didn't look at me. He looked at the empty chair at the head of the table, the one that had been his for 40 years. "Apologies for my tardiness," he said, his voice a dry rasp. He walked to an empty chair next to Senator Davies and sat down. Kincaid was ashen. "Frank, you're not on the board." "I am not," my grandfather said, "but my trust is, and its proxy is in this room." He raised one hand, a slight, almost imperceptible gesture. "Let the record show that the Vale Family Trust will be voting no on any and all agenda items related to or financed by any entity referred to as Halo until a full independent forensic audit has been completed and presented to all shareholders." It was a kill shot. He hadn't accused Kincaid of anything. He had simply, procedurally, frozen the merger. With his 19.6% vote, no resolution could pass. Kincaid looked trapped, his eyes darting between my grandfather, the auditor, and me. "This is an absurd delay tactic," he hissed, "based on fabricated evidence from a disgruntled employee." "The evidence isn't fabricated," I said, my voice cutting through his. "And it isn't just historical." I looked past Kincaid, my eyes finding my sister in the back row. "The payments from Project Halo weren't just for resorts, gentlemen," I announced to the board. "They were also used to distribute honoraria, or finder's fees, to individuals who helped facilitate the scheme. These payments were funneled through the same shell company from the photograph, Varela Outcomes, LLC. I pulled one last sheet of paper from my portfolio. It was a bank statement. "This morning, I subpoenaed the records for a secondary, undeclared account belonging to the senior brand manager, Savannah Vale." I lied about the subpoena. The anonymous tip was enough, but the legal term gave it weight. "An account at Braxton First Credit Union. Over the past 6 months, this account has received 3 electronic transfers from Varela Outcomes, LLC. The transaction codes on the transfers are a direct match for the invoice numbers on the Cielo Azul Key Retreat CSR expenditures." I looked directly at my sister. "A total of $50,000, paid into your personal account, Savannah." Every head in the room swiveled to the back. Savannah was chalk white, her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. She looked at Kincaid, her eyes wide with panic. He refused to meet her gaze. I, she stammered, her voice a thin, reedy whisper. I thought that was an event fee. For the gala." The lie was pathetic. It hung in the air, naked and stupid. The gala was last night. The payments were months old. The air conditioning kicked on, but the wind blowing through the room was colder. The lawyers from Cleary and Ash were no longer whispering. They were staring at Graham Kincaid, their expressions no longer those of defenders, but of morticians. The merger was dead, and they were looking at the corpse. The silence in the room was a living thing, thick and suffocating. Savannah was a ghost in the back row, her face a mask of waxy, paralytic shock. Kincaid, however, was not finished. He was a cornered animal, and he saw my sister as nothing but a shield. "This is deeply regrettable," Kincaid said, his voice regaining a fraction of its command. He looked at Savannah with undisguised contempt. "It's clear that Ms. Vale's personal financial issues and her sister's obvious complicity have clouded her judgment. She's a compromised party, and this entire performance is a pathetic, slanderous attempt to cover her own tracks." He was good. He was trying to twist it, to make it a fight between two sisters, a sordid family drama for the board to dismiss. "My sister's actions are a matter for the authorities," I said, my voice cutting through his. "But her compliance doesn't excuse your felony, specifically, your attempt to bribe a proxy holder, less than 24 hours ago." The board members, who had been looking at Savannah, snapped their heads back to me. Kincaid scoffed. "Now you're just lying. A desperate, slanderous accusation." "It's not slander when it's on tape," I said. I pulled my phone from my blazer pocket. I didn't fumble. I didn't shake. I tapped the screen and connected to the boardroom's main display via Bluetooth. A second later, the audio file was open. I pressed play. The room filled with the ambient, muffled sound of the Stonebrook Grill Terrace, and then Kincaid's voice, low and conspiratorial, filled the sterile air. "I know about Savannah, the credit cards, the debt. It's a nasty business. I'll authorize a loyalty bonus to your sister's payroll, enough to cover every dime she owes in your name. By Monday, you'll be free. All you have to do is be part of the family." Then my own voice, clear and cold as ice. "So to be clear for my records, you'll use a corporate discretionary fund to pay off my personal, fraudulent debt in exchange for my proxy vote on the Norcrest merger. Is that correct?" The recording ended on Kincaid's long, damning, furious silence. Senator Davies looked like he had swallowed acid. The venture capitalist's mouth was hanging open. Kincaid shot to his feet, his face purple. "This is a farce! It's a fabrication! That audio is fake! It's spliced! It's a deep fake! She works in compliance! She knows how to manipulate digital files! It's inadmissible!" He was right. In the modern world, audio was suspect. He had created a crack of reasonable doubt. The board members looked confused, their eyes darting between me, Kincaid, and the auditor. "You are absolutely right, Mr. Kincaid," I said, my voice dropping into the ensuing quiet. "Digital evidence can be tricky. It's so modern, so easily manipulated." I turned to the auditor, Mr. Peterson, who was watching me with a calm, analytical gaze. "That's why I prefer analog." I walked back to my portfolio. I ignored the laptop, the phone, the technology. I pulled out the single, glossy 35mm photograph from the Varex 76 box. "Let's ignore the bribe from last night," I said to the board. "Let's talk about its precedent. Let's talk about the origin of Project Halo." I placed the photograph in the center of the table. Mr. Peterson, the auditor, picked it up, holding it delicately by the edges. He placed it under the table's document camera, and the image flashed onto the main display, replacing the audio file. It was grainy. It was stark black and white. It was undeniably real. Kincaid, 3 years younger, signing a document, the man identified as Varela, smiling, and on the table between them, a thick manila envelope, open and overflowing with cash. "A 3-year-old photo," Kincaid sneered, though his voice was shaking. "It's meaningless. Taken out of context. A business dinner." "The context," I said, "is Varela Outcomes LLC, the shell company that was funneling your slush fund money to my sister. This photograph is the seed. This is the original sin that created Project Halo. This is you, funding the mechanism you're now using to defraud this company." "It proves nothing," Kincaid yelled. "On the contrary, Mr. Peterson, the auditor, said—" His voice was quiet, but it sliced through Kincaid's rage. The entire room went silent. Peterson looked at CFO Ron Mercer, who was sweating and staring at his blotter. "Ron, 3 years ago, you attended the Global Logistics Conference in Miami, correct?" Mercer looked up, panicked. Yes, it was a standard corporate trip." "And you posted a photo on the company's internal blog," Peterson continued, his tone conversational. He was already typing on his own laptop, bringing up a new image on the screen. It was a cheerful, low-resolution digital photo of Kincaid and Mercer, clinking champagne glasses, from the conference gala at the Fontaine Hotel. This one. Kincaid's eyes widened. He knew what was coming. "And now," Peterson said, "if you look at the EXIF data on your blog post, the embedded digital timestamp and GPS coordinates," he highlighted a string of numbers on the screen. "Your photo was taken at 8:14 p.m., at these exact coordinates." He then pointed to the grainy, black and white Varex photo on the other screen. The witness notes on the back of this analog print list the location as the Fontaine Hotel lobby, and the time as 9:30 p.m., the same night, and that, he said, pointing to a blurred shape in the background of the 35mm photo, "is the Fontaine's signature Ocean's Tears lobby sculpture. You can see it right behind Mr. Kincaid's head in both pictures." He had used the CFO's own digital post to corroborate the time and location of the analog evidence. He had placed Kincaid at the scene, on the night, making the cash payment. "But the most important piece," Peterson said, tapping the screen that showed the back of the Varex photo, "is this, the witness signature?" One of the Clarion Ash lawyers, a senior partner named Hayes, sat up straight. That looks like Elias Vance's signature." "Elias Vance?" the senator asked. "He was Frank's general counsel for 30 years. He retired. He's in Belize. He's unreachable." "Not entirely," my grandfather said. It was the first time he had spoken since he sat down. He tapped his own phone, and the main boardroom display flickered. The corporate logo was replaced by a live Zoom window. An old, sharp-eyed man in a bright, sunlit study filled with books appeared. He looked directly into the camera. "Mr. Vance?" Senator Davies gasped. "Senator," Elias Vance nodded, his voice crisp and clear. "Mr. Peterson, I trust you have the document I notarized on March 14th, 3 years ago?" Mr. Peterson held the back of the photograph up to the document camera. "We do. Mr. Vance, please confirm your signature and your notary seal," Peterson said. Elias Vance leaned forward, his eyes narrowing at the screen. "That is my signature, and that is my seal. I was present at the Fontaine Hotel in Miami at Mr. Frank Vale's request. I personally witnessed Mr. Graham Kincaid deliver an unauthorized cash payment of $250,000 to an individual named Marco Varela in exchange for future considerations regarding Florida shipping lanes." He held up his own official leather-bound notary book to his camera. "The transaction is logged herein, page 412, entry 8. It is, as of this moment, a matter of public record." The room was a tomb. The Cleary and Ash lawyers were pale. This wasn't slander. It was a notarized, witnessed, cross-referenced, multi-layered fact. The venture capitalist, the youngest of the independent directors, looked utterly bewildered. He looked from me to my grandfather. "I don't understand," he said, his voice shaky. Why was this evidence, this camera, this ledger, in a storage room? Frank, if you knew this 3 years ago, why didn't you stop him then? Why let it get this far?" All eyes turned to my grandfather. He leaned forward, both hands resting on his cane. His voice was quiet, but it carried the weight of the entire building. "Because stopping him was never the point," Frank Vale said. "Kincaid was a symptom. The disease was weakness. The board was asleep. The family was lazy. I knew he would eventually overreach. I knew he would use Halo for something big, like this merger." He looked at the board members, one by one. His gaze was scorching. "So I set a test. I locked the truth in a box. I didn't hide it. I archived it. I left it for someone inside this company to find. Someone with the discipline to look. Someone with the integrity to act." His eyes, cold and clear, finally landed on me. "I put the evidence in room 28B, he said, "and I waited for the right person to open the door." The silence that followed was an indictment of everyone in that room. The board who didn't look, the lawyers who didn't ask, Savannah who took the money, and me, the one who had been cold and desperate enough to use the key. Kincaid was broken. He was slumped in his chair, a hollowed-out man, but I wasn't finished. He tried to bribe me. He tried to use my pain, my sister's crime, as leverage. He deserved one more turn of the screw. "Mr. Kincaid is right about one thing, though," I said, my voice sharp. "The audio from last night could be fake. It's always good to have a digital backup." I looked at the Cleary and Ash lawyers, who now looked like they were attending a funeral. At 11:14 p.m. last night, after I rejected his verbal bribe and left the party, Mr. Kincaid became desperate. He was worried I had recorded him, so he did something incredibly stupid. He sent me an email. I put the final image on the screen. It was a screenshot of an email from G. Kincaid at graylinefoods.com to N. Vale at graylinefoods.com, subject, checking in. The body of the email was short and damning. "Nora, following up on our chat, I think we can find a solution that benefits everyone. Let's make this merger happen. I can authorize the expense reimbursement and the bonus immediately. Let's talk before the meeting." I highlighted the bottom of the email, the digital signature, the server timestamp, 2314. "He tried to create a digital paper trail for a deal," I said. "He confirmed our conversation. He digitally signed an offer to authorize the bonus immediately in exchange for making the merger happen. He was trying to buy my proxy vote, and he used the company server to do it." The lead lawyer from Cleary and Ash stood up. He looked physically ill. He closed his laptop with a soft, final thud. "Mr. Chairman," he said, his voice a dead monotone. On behalf of counsel, we find this sufficient. The combination of the notarized testimony, the corroborating digital evidence, and this email. This is sufficient to trigger a special investigation by an external committee. And of course, we must advise the board to indefinitely postpone the vote on Agenda Item 4. He looked at Kincaid, his eyes as cold as a morgue. Graham, I suggest you say nothing more. The lead counsel from Clarion Ash had not just postponed the vote. He had created a power vacuum. The room was suspended in a state of legal and corporate purgatory. The merger was dead. The CEO and CFO were fatally compromised. But they were, for the moment, still in their chairs. The investigation was a future event. The crime scene, however, was still active, and the perpetrators were still in charge of it. I did not sit down. I remained standing, my hands resting on the back of the empty chair. The power of the proxy was still mine to wield. Mr. Hayes, I said, addressing the senior lawyer, your advice is sound. An investigation is necessary, but an investigation overseen by the subjects of that investigation is a cover-up. I looked at the three independent directors, Senator Davies, the tech CEO, the venture capitalist. I ignored Kincaid and Mercer. They were no longer part of the equation. They were the problem to be solved. Therefore, I said, my voice resonating with a borrowed authority, on behalf of the Vail Family Trust, I table a motion for the immediate suspension of CEO Graham Kincaid and CFO Ron Mercer from all executive duties and all access to corporate property and systems, pending the outcome of the special investigation authorized by this board. A collective, sharp intake of breath. This wasn't a delay anymore. This was a coup. Kincaid slammed his fist on the table. You have no authority. This is a witch hunt. It's a motion, Senator Davies corrected him, his voice grim, and it requires a second. My grandfather, who had been silent, raised his hand again. The Vail Trust's proxy has already tabled the motion. It requires a second from a board member. The room was silent. The two lawyers looked at their feet. The venture capitalist, a Kincaid loyalist, shook his head, but the senator and the retired tech CEO, a woman named Chen, exchanged a long, meaningful look. They were the fiduciaries. They represented the other shareholders, the pension funds, the employees. Mr. Peterson, the auditor, cleared his throat. He did not look at Kincaid. He addressed the board. I can only state for the record, he said, his voice a dry statement of fact, that from a forensic standpoint, leaving the subjects of a financial investigation in control of the primary evidence is inadvisable. It creates significant legal and financial liability for the board, should that evidence be tampered with. That was it, the final piece. He had given them the legal cover they needed. He had turned inaction into a dereliction of duty. I second the motion, Senator Davies said, his voice like gravel. All in favor? The senator asked, taking control of the room. My grandfather raised his hand. That was 19.6%. Senator Davies raised his hand. He represented a block of pension funds that amounted to 6% of the company. After a moment's hesitation, the retired tech CEO, Ms. Chen, slowly raised hers. All opposed? Kincaid and the venture capitalist raised their hands. Mercer, the CFO, was so broken he didn't even move. The motion passes, 3-2, the senator declared, his voice flat. Graham, Ron, you are suspended, effective immediately. Please surrender your security badges and company devices to Ms. Hayes. Kincaid stared, his face a mask of disbelief and pure, undiluted hatred. He looked at me, his eyes promising a retribution that would never come. Then, with a strangled grunt, he stood up, threw his badge on the table, and stormed out of the room, his lawyer trailing in his wake. Mercer followed, a shuffling, defeated man. The room breathed again, but the work was not done. A suspension is not enough, I said into the silence. The evidence is not just on their laptops. It is on the servers. It is in the accounting software. It is in the email archives. The investigation will take weeks. The evidence could be deleted in minutes. What do you propose, Ms. Vale? Ms. Chen asked, her eyes sharp and analytical. I propose the creation of a temporary emergency executive position, effective immediately, I said. A chief ethics officer. This officer would report directly and only to the independent members of this board. Their sole mandate would be to secure all evidence related to Project Halo and its associated entities. They would have full, unrestricted, C-level access to all company systems, servers, and documents. They would have the authority to freeze accounts, suspend access, and ensure the complete integrity of the crime scene for Mr. Peterson's forensic team. It was a radical proposal, but in the wreckage of the morning, it sounded like the only logical next step. And who would you propose for this role? The venture capitalist asked, his voice dripping with suspicion. My grandfather looked at me. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes were clear. He had placed the weapon in my hand. He had watched me fire it. Now, he was giving me the keys to the castle. She can do it, he said. The venture capitalist scoffed. Her? She's a mid-level employee. This is a personal vendetta. She's the proxy for the largest shareholder, Senator Davies countered. And she's the only person in this company who has demonstrated the integrity and the courage to bring this to light. I, for one, would support her appointment. Ms. Chen nodded her agreement. Her knowledge of the details is invaluable. She's the logical choice. They looked at me, expecting an immediate, grateful acceptance. They were offering me the keys, the power, the office on the 30th floor. I will accept the position, I said, my voice ringing in the quiet room, on one non-negotiable condition. The board members stared at me. The disease in this company isn't just Project Halo, I said. It's the culture of secrecy that allowed it to fester. The slush fund was hidden inside the charitable budget. The rot was disguised as virtue. My condition is this. I will accept the role of interim chief ethics officer, but only if this board votes, right now, to authorize the immediate and total public disclosure of all corporate social responsibility expenditures for the past 5 fiscal years. Not a summary, not a press release, a full, uncensored, line-item ledger of every dollar spent, every vendor paid, every invoice submitted. It will be posted on the company's internal server, available to every single employee, from the loading dock to the executive suite, by the end of business today. I was not asking for power for myself. I was demanding transparency for everyone. I was using their offer of control to strip them of their secrecy, forever. It was a condition so pure in its stated intent that they couldn't refuse without revealing their own complicity. Senator Davies looked at Ms. Chen. She gave a slow, deliberate nod. I move that we accept Ms. Vale's condition and appoint her as interim chief ethics officer, with the authority she has described. The senator said. Second, said Ms. Chen. All in favor? 3 hands went up. The venture capitalist abstained, his face sour. The motion passes, the senator declared. He looked at me, a new respect in his eyes. Congratulations, Ms. Vale. You have a busy afternoon ahead of you. The meeting was over. The lawyers were already huddled, drafting the resolutions. The board members were making quiet, urgent calls. My grandfather stood up, his cane clicking on the floor. He walked over to me, placed a hand on my shoulder, and simply nodded. No words were needed. As I gathered my portfolio, a shadow fell over me. It was Savannah. Her face was a ruin, streaked with tears, her makeup smeared. The gold dress from last night now looked cheap and tawdry in the harsh light of morning. She grabbed my arm. Her grip was desperate. Nora, she whispered. Her voice choked. Nora, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I swear. I didn't know what it was. Kincaid. He just told me it was a performance bonus for client relations. He said it was standard. I looked at her manicured nails digging into the sleeve of my cheap blazer. I felt nothing. No anger, no pity, no sisterly connection. The emotional nerve that had once tied me to her had been severed. She was just a loose end, a piece of compromised data, a liability. I didn't answer her. I didn't even look her in the eye. I pulled my arm free, turned my gaze to the large display screen at the front of the room. One of the lawyers had already started drafting the official board resolution. On the screen, under the heading Action Items, he had typed a new line. Item 1. Freeze all accounts and access related to Project Halo. See Investigation File 734. The name was gone. The vague corporate buzzword had vanished. It was no longer a project. It was a case number. I had won. The elevator ride down from the 30th floor was a descent into a new reality. The heavy silence between my grandfather and me was not awkward. It was a shared, sealed understanding. The adrenaline from the boardroom had receded, leaving behind a cold, clear focus. I was no longer Nora Vale, the mid-level drone living in a storage unit. That person was a husk I had shed. I was now an instrument, a legal entity with a title and a 19.6% stake, and my work was just beginning. As the elevator passed the 10th floor, we could hear it, a low, chaotic roar, the sound of a crowd where one should not exist. It was the sound of the outside world pressing against the glass and marble of the lobby. The elevator doors opened, not to the main hall, but to the executive reception area, a silent, carpeted space. A single, panicked-looking security guard stood by the inner glass doors leading to the main atrium. He saw my grandfather, and his face went pale. "Mr. Vale, sir, it's a bit of a situation out there. The press." My grandfather didn't acknowledge him. He simply tapped his cane on the floor, a quiet signal for the guard to open the doors. The guard hesitated, then complied. The sound hit us first, a wall of noise, the frantic, percussive clicking of dozens of camera shutters, the overlapping shouts of questions. The lobby, usually a serene cathedral of corporate power, had been transformed into a chaotic press scrum. Local news vans were visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows, their satellite dishes aimed at the building like siege weapons. The Norcrest merger was the biggest business story in the state. The last-minute postponement was blood in the water, and the sharks had gathered. In the center of the lobby, standing beneath the massive, brushed steel Greyline Foods logo, was the company's head of communications, a slick man named Donovan. He was sweating, his expensive suit suddenly looking too tight. He was trying to read from a prepared statement on his phone, but the reporters were drowning him out. "Unforeseen procedural delays," he stammered, his voice thin and reedy. "A commitment to maximizing shareholder value. We will provide an update in due course." He was a man trying to put out a forest fire with a water pistol. He was using the old language of corporate obfuscation, and it was failing spectacularly. My grandfather stopped. He looked at the scene, then he looked at me. He didn't say a word. He just gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. "Your stage." I walked past him. I walked past the flustered security guards. I walked out onto the cold marble, my sensible, rubber-soled shoes making no sound. I walked directly toward the wall of cameras and shouting reporters, stopping a few feet in front of the overwhelmed Donovan. The chaos faltered for a second. The reporters, sensing a shift, a new subject, quieted slightly. Their camera lenses swiveled from Donovan to me. I ignored them. I looked at Donovan, who was staring at me with a mixture of terror and fury. "Thank you, Donovan," I said, my voice calm but carrying in the suddenly quieter space. "I'll take it from here." He looked at me, utterly bewildered. I was a face he'd probably seen in the cafeteria, a nobody. He opened his mouth to object, but no sound came out. I turned my back on him and faced the press. The camera flashes were blinding, a barrage of white light. I didn't flinch. I let them take their pictures of the anonymous woman in the gray blazer. "Good morning," I said. My voice was not loud, but it was clear and steady. The shouting stopped completely. All that remained was the frantic clicking of shutters. "My name is Nora Vale," I said. I am speaking on behalf of the board of Greyline Foods. I let that sink in. I could see the confusion on their faces. They were running my name through their mental databases, coming up empty. As of this morning, I continued, the company has opened a special investigation into the administration and expenditure of its community sponsorship funds, including the Nourishing Futures program. A low murmur went through the press corps. This was not about procedural delays. This was something else, something better. As a first step in this process, I said, my words precise, each one a hammer blow. All contracts, invoices, and vendor payments related to our corporate social responsibility budget for the last 5 years will be made public by the end of the day. The murmur exploded into a roar of shouted questions. What kind of investigation? Is the merger off? Does this involve the CEO? One reporter, a woman in the front row with a microphone thrust forward, yelled louder than the rest. Her question cut through the noise. Who are you to say that? What's your title? Who gives you the authority to make that statement? It was the perfect question, the only question that mattered. I didn't answer her with words. I reached into my blazer pocket and pulled out my new ID card, printed just an hour ago by a terrified-looking HR assistant under the direct order of the board's counsel. I held it up for them to see. Nora Vale, I said, reading my own title aloud. Interim Chief Ethics Officer. I paused, letting the cameras focus on the card. Then I added the final, crushing weight. An acting proxy for the Vale Family Trust. A shockwave went through the lobby. Vale. The name was a thunderclap. The trust was a myth, a legend in the company's founding charter. In that moment, I was no longer an anonymous woman. I was the founder's blood. I was the largest shareholder. I was the one with the authority. At that exact moment, my grandfather stepped up beside me. He didn't speak. He didn't smile. He simply placed his large, old hand on my shoulder. The camera flashes intensified into a single, blinding, continuous strobe of light. It was the money shot, the founder, the old king, returning from exile to stand with his heir, the silent, undeniable transfer of power, captured for the front page of tomorrow's paper. The story was no longer about a delayed merger. It was about a palace coup. News and fear travel faster than light in a corporate environment. As we stood there, my phone, which I had put on vibrate, began to buzz incessantly in my pocket. Slack notifications, internal email alerts. The information was spreading through the building's digital nervous system. A security guard was whispering into his radio, his eyes wide. He looked at the main entrance. We all did. A side door opened, and Graham Kincaid and Ron Mercer scurried out, flanked by the lawyers from Cleary and Ash. They didn't look at the press. They didn't look at us. They stared at the floor, their faces gray. As they made a walk of shame to a black sedan waiting at the curb, the press corps surged toward them, but it was too late. The car was already pulling away, a hearse carrying 2 corporate corpses. The narrative was sealed. The old guard was out. My grandfather gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze and then stepped back, leaving me alone at the center of the storm. My work here was done. It was time to begin my real work upstairs. I turned and walked back toward the executive elevator, the reporters shouting my name behind me. I ignored them. As I rode the elevator up, alone this time, I took out my company phone. I opened the email client. I composed a new message. To all employees at Greyline Foods. Com. From Nora. Vale at Greyline Foods. Com. Subject, a new standard of integrity. I typed a single, simple paragraph. My name is Nora Vale. As of today, I am your interim chief ethics officer. My only job is to find the truth, but I cannot do it alone. This company's integrity is not the responsibility of one person, but of all of us. If you have ever been asked to alter a report, to misclassify an expense, or to approve an invoice you knew was wrong, I ask you to come forward. My new office is now open. It is a safe place. The door is unlocked. I paused. my thumb hovering over the address. Then I typed the final 3 words. Room 28B. I hit send. The email went out to all 3,000 employees of Gray Line Foods, from the truck drivers in the distribution centers to the marketing assistants on the 19th floor. When the elevator doors opened on the 28th floor, the corridor was empty and silent, just as it had been the day before. I walked to the old metal door of room 28B and pushed it open. I turned on the single, buzzing fluorescent light. I sat down at the small, dusty desk I had set up, opened my laptop, and began the process of securing the servers. For an hour, nothing happened. The only sound was the hum of the light and the clicking of my own keyboard. I wondered if I had been naive. I wondered if the fear Kincaid had cultivated was too deep, if the culture was too broken. Then, I heard it, the ding of the elevator at the end of the hall, followed by footsteps, not one person, several. I looked up from my laptop. A man from accounting stood in the doorway. Behind him was a junior analyst from logistics, and behind her, a woman from the Midwest plant, who I recognized from my audit trip. They didn't speak. They just looked at me, their faces a mixture of fear and hope. The elevator chimed again. More footsteps. The line started in my doorway and stretched down the quiet, carpeted hall, a silent pilgrimage of accountants, brand managers, and warehouse supervisors, all holding their laptops, their notebooks, their own pieces of the truth. They had been waiting for years for someone to open the door. And now, they were walking in. It was well past midnight. The line of employees had finally dwindled, their whispered stories and forwarded emails now logged, encrypted, and secured on a server that only I and the forensic auditor could access. The corridor outside room 28B was quiet again. The buzzing fluorescent light seemed to hum with the weight of all the secrets it now held. I stood up from the small metal desk. The campaign was over. The cleanup had begun. Methodically, I began to close down the operation that had started this war. I picked up the Varex 76 camera. It's heavy, cold metal, a familiar weight in my hands now. I didn't wipe it for prints. I didn't treat it like evidence anymore. It was an heirloom. I carefully placed the lens cap over the glass eye that had seen the truth. Then I placed the camera back in its foam bed inside the gray metal box. Next, I took the old brass key from my pocket. It had been my talisman for 3 days, a constant, physical reminder of my purpose. It had opened the door to this room, to this life. Now, its job was done. I slid open the top drawer of one of the old filing cabinets. It was empty, save for a film of dust. I placed the key inside, its brass form looking small and lonely in the cavernous space. I slid the drawer shut. The sound was soft, final. A quiet voice came from the doorway. The lock is only as strong as the person who holds the key. My grandfather was leaning against the doorframe, his overcoat still on, his cane held loosely in one hand. He hadn't left. He had been watching, a silent sentinel, for hours. "People think money saves people," he said, his voice a low rasp in the quiet room. He walked in, the tap of his cane a slow, deliberate rhythm on the concrete floor. "It doesn't. Money makes them weak. It makes them forget how to fight." He stopped in front of the desk and looked at the closed Varex box. "Discipline," he said, tapping the box with the tip of his cane. "Discipline saves people. The discipline to see the world as it is, not as you wish it were. The discipline to do the hard thing, the slow thing, the right thing." I looked at him, at the tired lines around his sharp, unyielding eyes. I thought of the cold nights in Unit B12. I thought of the shame, the hunger, the suffocating weight of the debt. He had watched me suffer. He had done nothing to ease it. I nodded, a single, sharp movement. "You didn't give me money," I said. It was not an accusation. It was a statement of fact, the core of our entire transaction. A rare, thin smile touched my grandfather's lips. It didn't reach his eyes, but it was there. He looked at me, and for the first time, I felt like he was seeing not his granddaughter, but his equal. "No," he said. "I gave you the vote." As if on cue. My phone vibrated on the desk. A single, official email notification from the board's legal counsel. The subject line was clinical. Board Resolution 4A, Interim Governance. I opened it. The text was brief. A short summary of the motion that had passed hours ago. It confirmed my appointment as chair of the Special Committee on Ethics and Governance for a term of 90 days. It granted me plenary power to preserve all evidence, secure all systems, and compel the testimony of any employee. It was the legal codification of my victory. The keys to the kingdom, now in writing. I closed the email. There was one last piece of business. I picked up my phone again and opened my text messages. I scrolled to the bottom of the long, unanswered thread of frantic, pleading messages from Savannah. Her last one, sent an hour ago, was a single, pathetic question. What do I do now? My thumbs moved quickly across the screen. I typed my reply. It was only 6 words. Pay the debt with your own money. I hit send. Then, without waiting for a reply, I blocked her number. The final liability had been firewalled. The last ghost of my old life, exorcised. I turned off the desk lamp. I picked up my blazer. My work here, for tonight, was done. I walked to the door, my grandfather stepping aside to let me pass. I pulled the heavy metal door shut behind me. It latched with a soft click. Then I turned the old lock. The bolt slid home with a loud, satisfying, metallic thud. The climax was over. The story was finished. Thank you so much for listening to the story. I'd love to know where you're all tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let me know. And feel free to share your thoughts on Nora's journey. If you enjoyed it, please consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video. And if you really want to support what we do, hit that hype button to help this story get heard by even more people.